Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a part of classic television history. He played everyone's favorite werewolf child, Eddie Munster, on the hit TV show The Munsters. In 70 episodes and in the hit movie Munster Go Home, our guest frolicked on the screen with legendary actors Fred Gwynne, Yvonne DeCarlo, and Al Lewis, portraying a family of lovable Transylvanian Americans somewhere in suburbia. The popularity of the Munsters has only increased throughout the decades thanks to syndication on numerous TV channels. After the Munsters, our guest went on to star in the highly popular classic Saturday morning children's show Lidsville. He also starred in 2 Disney movies and was a regular on My Three Sons as Ernie Douglas's best friend Gordon. And he guest starred in numerous TV shows, including I Dream of Jeannie, Gunsmoke, The Monkees, The Simpsons, and many more. And he reprised his role as Eddie Munster in macabre theater and TV therapy, as well as appearing in the TV movie Here Come the Munsters. And in 2015, he produced a terrific book entitled Butch Patrick's Munster Memoirs, a coffin table book, which I am proud to say is on my living room coffee table. I'm delighted to welcome Butch Patrick to our show. Butch, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Harvey.
Butch, I must tell you that I'm a huge Munsters fan, and I'm really thrilled to have you on the show because you've done so much throughout your life to keep the legacy of the Munsters alive, haven't you?
Well, I have. It's kind of fun, actually. For me, it's been a very pleasurable trip as I'm kind of a gearhead, but with George Barris and, hanging out with George and all the cars and being a gearhead, the Munsters is a perfect vehicle, no pun intended, for me to keep the show alive.
Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that before you started playing Eddie Munster, you appeared in a whole slew of movies and TV shows as a very young child, opposite legendary stars like Judy Garland, Burt Lancaster, Sidney Poitier. Do you have any memories of working with any of them, or were you just too young?
Well, a lot of times when you do movies, you're in the movie with the person, but not necessarily in the same scenes. And that occurred occasionally. Although I did work with Burt Lancaster, I didn't work with Judy Garland. But before the Munsters, probably for me, the most famous people that I was working with, I was very impressed working with Richard Crenna on The Real McCoys. But my mom introduced me to the fact that Walter Brennan was a triple Academy Award winner for his portrayal. So, I didn't really know about Amos McCoy, Walter Brennan, but I knew about Richard Crenna from My Miss Brooks. So it kind of all evened out. But my mom did introduce me to the fact that I was working with a lot of very famous movie stars. Yes.
You were 10 years old when you started filming The Munsters, and you were chosen out of hundreds of boys to play Eddie Munster, even though you did not play him in the pilot episode. What do you think it was about you, Butch, that landed you the part?
Well, I played younger than I actually was. So they like the fact that when you're 11 or 12, you look 8 or 9, that helps. And then mentally, I was wise beyond my years. So I was able to handle a lot of dialogue, and they enjoyed the play that it grew into with the father and son shows. But I think originally, to be honest with you, it was I won the part by default. First, they wanted Bill Mumy, and Bill Mumy turned it down. I was living in Illinois at the time. I wasn't even in Hollywood for the casting process. And it went to pilot with the networks. And then the network said, we want to change the mother and the kid, which then led Yvonne DeCarlo and myself to be screen tested together. And they hired us both. So I think it just was meant to be, I guess.
And I think you had the perfect teeth, don't you, as a kid?
Yeah, my horrible eye teeth probably did not hurt the fact that I could purse my lips together and my little eye teeth would stick out like fangs. So yeah, that was probably the icing on the cake to close the deal.
Well, what I think is fascinating, in the pilot episode, Eddie Munster was portrayed by Happy Durman as a nasty little brat, but you portrayed him as a polite little boy. Would you have preferred to play him as a bit of a naughty brat?
No, it would have been tough for me to play him as a brat. Luckily for me, most of the parts when I would go up and read for, my interpretation was pretty much what they were looking for, which was great. But the trick is in acting, like anything, you do your best as you interpret it. But if it's not right, you then have to adjust it for what the director's needs are, which I could do. But luckily for me, my natural demeanor as Eddie Munster is what they were looking for. So, lucky me.
You know something? I was an only child, and I wanted you so badly to be my brother. You have no idea.
it's funny. I was a very quick story. I was with Robert Patrick, very famous actor, and I went and introduced myself to him last year actually, and he paused for a second, and he says, Atlanta, 1965. I'm watching the Munsters, and I said, if he can do it, I can do it. So he wanted to become an actor because he thought somehow we might be related.
And you had the coolest pet, a dragon.
Yeah, we had a lot of good stuff. We had the cool pets. We had the black cat. We had the raven. But yes, Spot the Dragon was probably the world's coolest pet.
The thing about the Munsters that made the show so special for me is that although the characters were supposed to be monsters or supernatural creatures, except for Marilyn, they were actually a very normal American family. The show was like a satire of the typical American sitcom, don't you think?
Yes, and that was one of the reasons why the show was so successful, I think. It literally, on paper, it looked like no one would believe this. I mean, that just on paper when you read the script. But because Fred and Al's persona and the way they took over the character, you never thought of them as Frankenstein and Dracula, and you never thought of Lily as Vampire. What you thought of them was a very lovable, typical average American family who happened to look different. And then, of course, the play on it was the beautiful blonde that we had living with us, Marilyn. We thought that she was the unfortunate one, and she looked past our physical appearance and loved us as a family. So it was very heartwarming, but it was a typical American family with extraordinary circumstances surrounding it.
Now, many people like to compare the Munsters with the Addams Family, which was another sitcom with macabre characters. What do you see as the big difference between those two shows?
Well, the Addams Family was very dark. It was, based upon Charles Addams's New Yorker, and it was, it was dark comedy. And it's funny, I tell people, because they do mix them up a lot, and that's a nice thing. And I say, well, it's very easy to differentiate between the two. The Munsters were people who looked like monsters, and the Addams Family were monsters who looked like people.
That's exactly right. The Munsters were mostly monsters who acted human, but the Addams Family were mostly human who were acting ghoulish.
Yes, very much so.
I've always wondered why the Munsters was filmed in black and white and not color. Do you know why?
Well, color didn't exist. We were the second year we were on, it was the transition was just happening for TV sets to be able to be broadcast in color. TV shows and TV sets were being sold. So we were the last year of black and white programming. We were right on the cusp. If you look back in 64, 65, you'll see black and white I Dream of Jeannie's, black and white Gilligan's Islands, black and white Beverly Hillbillies, and then in 66, they switched over.
Do you have a favorite episode of the Munsters?
Oh, there's several of them, but I guess one would be Zombo, which was funny because it was a TV host that I was enamored with, that I thought was real, and just the idea of being on TV and watching another TV show. I didn't have many guest stars come visit me, so I loved when Bill Mumy came in and did Come Back Little Googie, and he played the brat, so that was good. Hot Rod Herman, of course, because we introduced the Dragula, and I was a big gearhead. So those are three of my favorites. Eddie's nickname, maybe too, where I grew a beard with Paul Lynde as the Dr. Dudley.
I love that one. My favorite episode was the Easter special when you visited Marineland to get a new pet.
Yeah, Marineland of the Pacific, the original, SeaWorld type park. I was a big fan of Sea Hunt, with Lloyd Bridges as Mike Nelson. So that was the original place where they used to film Sea Hunt. So I was all excited about that.
Now, the Munsters only lasted 2 seasons, and some people say that Batman was the cause of the show being canceled. Do you agree?
Yeah, that was the main cause, the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. It was ratings were down. Batman was very popular. There was a little bit of a cost situation of going to color, not going to color, whether it would be worth it. And then I also think there was another factor that most people didn't understand is Fred and Al were from New York, and they were New Yorkers, and they were out on the West Coast working. And I think that they were ready to go back home as well. So a combination of all of the above.
Well, isn't it interesting that Batman only lasted 2 seasons as well?
A lot of shows back then were short runs. Yes. Star Trek was 3 years. Gilligan's Island was 3 years. Honeymooners was 39 episodes. So it was not uncommon for a popular show to have a brief run.
Now, as you know, the Munsters has become a legendary show. There have been 5 movies, including Munster Go Home, which you were in. And there was the 1995 TV movie, Here Come the Munsters, which you were also in. And there was the Munsters Today TV show, which ran for 2 years in the late 80s. Are you surprised that the Munsters has had such longevity in popular culture?
Well, yes, a little bit. Yeah, I would say so. I know there's a lot of shows back in the 60s. You have to remember is the 60s, it's kind of a double-edged sword. People come up and ask me that. What do you attribute the longevity of the show, and why don't they make shows like that anymore? And I tell them, I go, well, number one is television was produced in whatever period of time was a reflection of society of the time. So obviously shows from the 60s you couldn't be made today because the mentality of the world is just so much different, and the social fabric has changed. But why they're still popular is people have a fond memory of what it used to like to be if you're old enough to remember it firsthand. And if you haven't remembered it firsthand, you still enjoy good quality comedy and good quality programming and production values, which the Munsters had. So it lends itself to a very friendly, timeless type, easy to watch show for all generations.
I want to take your mind back, Butch, to February 3rd, 1994, when you made a surprise appearance on Vicki Lawrence's TV talk show as she was interviewing Yvonne DeCarlo. That was actually quite emotional. I still think about it. Can you tell us about that experience?
Well, that was the first time that I had reconnected with Yvonne DeCarlo. I had reconnected with Fred and Al earlier than that, but not Yvonne. And it was very, I was a big fan of Vicki Lawrence anyway, and in the Carol Burnett show and everything she had done. So it was really an honor not only to meet Vicki and do her show, but under the circumstances to be a surprise guest for my TV mom, Yvonne DeCarlo. It was a very big, very much a high point for me. Yes.
Did you remain friends with her in later years?
I did. Yes. She was living about 2 hours north of Los Angeles in Napoma, a little city near Santa Maria. And not only did we go up and visit her, and I introduced her to some other people, Kevin Burns, who was the biggest Munster fan in the world and a very successful TV producer. We went up together to meet her. And after that, Kevin took it upon himself to send her care packages of stuff to watch. And she was living by herself. And he really stepped to the plate because I wasn't living in California and I had left, but he was there. So he took good care of Yvonne. I was glad that I sort of passed the torch to him that they could remain friends, which they did. And he took good care of her.
And what about Al Lewis? You remained friends with him too, didn't you?
Yes. Al Lewis and I worked a lot together. We were very close, hundreds of appearances we met again in 1980 when I was doing Eddie and the Munsters. They were shooting the Munsters. Here Come the Munsters. The Munsters Revenge. They were shooting the Munsters Revenge in Marina Del Rey across from a friend of mine's business. And he called me up and he goes, the Munsters are shooting across the street. Now this is like 15 years after the show wrapped. And I couldn't believe it. So I drove myself out there and I surprised them on the set, rekindled our friendship. And Al and I then, I asked him to help me out with some publicity and some marketing. And we started doing personal appearances together and became close and stayed close.
What about Fred Gwynne? Did you have much to do with him after the Munsters ended?
No, Fred was, he sort of distanced himself from the Munsters because he did such a great job as Herman Munster that it sort of followed him around like a shadow, that everything he did was Munster related, or there was a connection to the Munsters. And unfortunately, it was hard to shake for him. So what he tried to do was not add to that by hanging around with the cast of the Munsters, because that obviously would be the first thing people would ask about. So he and I didn't hang around together. But then again, he didn't say not to come visit me. It was just one of those things where he moved to Maryland and I just never crossed paths with him.
Tell us about the experience of starring in Lidsville and working with Sid and Marty Krofft. Was that as much fun for you as the Munsters?
No, it was not. It was a lot more work. And I'll tell you what was fun, though. It was fun to work with all the little people that I had met in Hollywood over the years who were friends of mine. And I really enjoyed working with Billy Hayes and Sharon Baird, who was Raunchy Rabbit, one of the original Mouseketeers. Charles Nelson Riley was fun, but he was a little difficult at times, because he didn't like the makeup and it was difficult for him to do this and do that. But what I did enjoy a lot more was the technique of which we shot the show. It was kind of fun having multiple cameras and chroma key and a lot of zapping and smoke pots and doing this and doing that. And I enjoyed working at the Paramount studio as well. So there was a lot of good stuff going on, but it was a lot of work, but it was only 11 weeks. So, we all survived.
Butch, we've had a few former child stars on our show, including Kathy Garver and Angela Cartwright. As you know, a lot of child stars had a very difficult time transitioning into adulthood, both in their personal lives and in the industry. And a lot of them had substance abuse problems and emotional problems. Did you have a difficult time as a young adult?
Well, I at the time I didn't think I was having a difficult time. I thought I was throwing the best parties and having a great time. But yes, in hindsight, sure, I did. It lasted 40 years, so I just celebrated. I got 11 years and 4 months now coming up of sobriety, but it took me quite a while to get there. And you got to remember, as I related back to the 60s and society and how things were, it was a whole different world back then. The old adage, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. Well, it's pretty close to the truth, because there was some wild times going on in the country, and especially in Hollywood. Sunset Strip. If you're in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury district, the Grateful Dead, Woodstock. Everybody was getting high. Everybody was tuning in, turning on, and dropping out, like Timothy Leary would say. So it was not uncommon for people in the country to do this, but especially prevalent in Hollywood.
There was a period of time that you left show business, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. I got out of the business right after Lidsville, actually. 19 years old. I was in the last year of the draft. The Vietnam War was still raging on, and I thought I was going to be going to go over and fight, because in the lottery, the first 100 numbers birthdays, you go to the induction center and you get classified, and I was number 41. My best friend was number 44, so we went up together, and they found out that I had an injury to my knee from a skiing accident that I wasn't really aware of, that kept me out of the draft. But by the time that had been diagnosed, I had already petitioned the courts to get my money out of the bank prior to being 21, changed the law to 18, and I was 19 at the time. So I took the money and went down to the beach and bought race cars and, fast women and faster times, and had a great time. And then I didn't go to Vietnam. So I wound up winding up into the private sector, and just, opened up a few small businesses and did this and did that, and just mostly car related stuff.
In 2008, you authorized a biography to be written about you by Helen Darras entitled Eddie Munster, aka Butch Patrick, The Untold Story of His Early Hollywood Coulda, Shoulda Years. What would you say was the most surprising thing about you that was revealed in the book?
That was a period right before I got sober. That was I had met Helen Darras. She was she was at a toy show in Pittsburgh with her family. We met. She wanted to do a book. She offered to do a book, and I allowed it to happen. And there wasn't a whole lot in there that I would be. It's accurate, but it's not really me. It was more written through her eyes. So I'm more likely to tell people to get the Munster Memory book, which came out in 2014, and that's a lot more interesting and stuff. More likely, more my book that I wrote personally. As far as the red book with the lenticular cover, it's a cool looking book, and it's got some information in it, but it's not really as accurate as I would have liked it to be.
That was the impression I got too when I read it. I didn't feel like I got to know you.
Yeah, no, it was kind of written on a premise that it allowed Helen to enter the Hollywood field and meet some people, which she did, and then she went on and did some other things. But no, it really wasn't my book. It was more of a vehicle for her.
Now, in 1983, you formed a band called Eddie and the Munsters, and you recorded 2 songs, Whatever Happened to Eddie and It's Only Halloween. I think we were all shocked to find out that you could sing. What took you so long to show off your singing skills?
Well, now let's go back here a little bit. In 1972, right after Lidsville, I signed on with Metro Media Records to replace, they had let Bobby Sherman go. So these producers of Sugarloaf sought me out and said, would you like to do a record? And I said, well, I don't sing. And they basically said, well, it doesn't matter. We can dub it. And, we followed David Cassidy around the country for 6 months, trying to figure out the formula to become a successful bubblegum star is what we did. I lip synced on American Bandstand. I like to say I was the original Munster Manilli, long before Millie. And we did this for about 6 months. The record didn't sell. It was a great song. It was a Bee Gees song, actually. Io, Io. The teeny bop thing didn't work out. Fast forward to Whatever Happened to Eddie. I wrote the lyrics to that song, but in the studio, my guitar player sang Brett Black because he sounded a lot like me and could carry a better tune. And my bass player It turned out to be Phil Cohn. So I had a bass on, but I wasn't actually physically playing the bass. So I kind of upped the ante a little bit. But now, believe it or not, later in life, I can actually carry a tune. Who would have thought? So the It's Only Halloween was not recorded in the 80s. It was recorded about 14 years ago with Henry Golis in Alicia Keys' studio up in Long Island.
That's amazing. Well, in 2002, you appeared on a reality TV show called Star Dates. What did you think of that experience?
That was an interesting situation. I met Lisa Marie, who was still a dear friend. The other girl on the date wasn't too pleased with my presence, so it really played up well. It was a huge success. I mean, for E! Entertainment, next to, I believe it was Anna Nicole, it was the most popular show pilot that they'd ever premiered that they ever had. So it was a huge hit. And they had done I think they did Jill Whelan and Gary Coleman. There was about 5 or 6 of us that did it, and they chose mine as the launch one, as the pilot premiere. So I was kind of honored about that, but it was not the greatest experience. But it was fun.
It was a lot of fun to watch. Now, of course, this was coming. I have to ask you about your book, Butch Patrick's Munster Memories, a Coffin Table Book, which I absolutely love. It was published in 2014. What inspired you to write that book?
This book literally wrote itself. I was going and doing personal appearances, and I was always enamored, and I always enjoyed hearing the fond stories that people would share with me about what the Munsters had meant to them, the memories that the show had instilled, whether it was their favorite grandparent or their aunt or uncle that used to watch it together that is no longer with them. They always had these really warm, stories to share, so that we were like an extended part of the family and this and that. So as I got these stories coming across the desk, I started compiling them. And then I decided about 6 months before the 50th anniversary of the show, which would have been September 24th in 2014, I called a friend of mine. I said, he did the artwork for the Munsters TV comics books. And I said, Rich, I really need to get this book out in 6 months. He goes, that's a 2-year project. I said, I need it done in 6 months. I got to have it come out on the day of the 50th anniversary. So he went ahead and did a bang up job. What I did is I added in stories of people that were involved with the show personally, Michael Westmore, Bill Mooney, George Barris, things of that nature. Then I added in super collectors, because the Munsters has so many toys and has been so heavily merchandised. Everybody has Munster toys that loves the show. So I added that dimension into it, and that factored in. So between my stories, participatory stories from people in the business, and this, it came out to be a really cool book that came out on the 50th anniversary to the day.
Can I tell you why I found the Munsters so meaningful to me?
Yeah, please.
I was really badly bullied as a kid and never felt like I belonged. And I was always on the outside looking in. And your show of this family that clearly were very different made me feel like I belonged.
Well, that's great. I hear that occasionally. There was a girl that worked at a radio station, a young girl too. She's about 20 years old. And when we went in to let them know that we were there, she goes, I got to tell you, she goes, when I was 8 years old, she goes, I had really, really bad depression. She was a very depressed young girl. And she says, and your show was the only show that brought me out of it. You were like my imaginary family, and I could go in a room and watch it, and it would get me through tough times. And I go, oh my gosh, can you imagine how many people like yourself we affected in a good way? And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy going out and meeting the fans. It's always a feel-good moment. In this day and age, when you can put a smile on someone's face and you can share a moment that means a lot to them, you're a very blessed person.
Yes, well, I think you brought a lot more joy to people who felt like they needed to feel like they belonged somewhere than you may even realize.
There's this thing about having friends, and I have a very big network of friends, but I have an extended family of friends that I'll never be able to meet all of them. I do my best, but we have a fan group of over 51,000 members, and it's family friendly. And the woman that runs it, Lois, keeps it totally totally G. If it wouldn't be said on the show, it wouldn't be said in the fan group, and people just love it. So we try our best to maintain a Munsters quality and a Munsters era out there, which is good. And as you probably know, Rob Zombie's coming up with a movie that may have been on your list of things to do. I didn't mean to jump ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask you about this movie. Is it going to happen? I mean, I went on IMDb. I see you have a few projects in the works. Are you able to tell us about any of them?
Well, the Rob Zombie is happening. Absolutely. He and it's just got a PG rating, which is huge because everybody was so concerned that, his movies are a little bit dark and, bloody and gory. And that's not the case at all with this particular project. So I'm very, very happy that everybody knows that now. That'll be great. My own personal projects, I'm actually very excited. I'm heading out next month to spend the summer it's a place called Indiana Beach, which is above Indianapolis on Lake Schaefer. It's a 96-year-old nostalgia-driven theme park, 400 acres, great rides, great people, great history. The ballroom used to have concerts by the big bands and the Who and Alice Cooper and the Beach Boys and the Yardbirds. I mean, everybody who was anybody that was touring in the 50s and 60s and the early 70s played at Indiana Beach. So not only am I in charge of park promotions, and I'm going to be putting my Munster Coach and Dragula and my Munster collection on display, I have a friend in the area who's bringing over his Addams Family collection. He's got the polar bear and a bunch of other stuff from the Addams Family. So we're going to make a wonderful TV Munster Addams Family Monster Museum on park property. And then once a month, I'm going to do a ballroom event where it'll be somewhat like American Bandstand. And then we're also working with Classic Reruns TV to broadcast it in a very old school black and white flavor. If you go to munsters.com, that leads you to my personal appearances. And I'm going to be doing like a daily YouTube channel off the park property, very much meeting and greeting people, getting more Munster memories, get more stories from people. It's my job to let the country know about this wonderful, wonderful place that's, affordable, friendly, safe. It's everything you would want. And it happens to be right in the heartland.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared that with us because we've now got 3 million viewers who are going to know about it.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Yeah. Indiana Beach, you can't miss it. Just .com. And I'm going to be spending my summer in and around the area in the Midwest, but it's only like an hour and a half from Chicago and 2.5 hours from Detroit, an hour above Indianapolis. So it's really, people that are driving and crisscrossing around in the Midwest. It's a wonderful destination. So thank you.
I'm going to make it part of my summer plans. And I've got to tell you, Mr. Butch Patrick, it's been a real pleasure to finally meet you and get a chance to talk about your life and career. Thank you for all the great memories you've given us. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on our show.
It's been my pleasure. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Our guest has been actor and author Butch Patrick. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.